There we go.
There we go.
There we go. Belying the rumor, allegedly, that Virgos are always on time, we are joined now by my dear friend and teacher, Brother Moses. Thank you
And Virgo,
so much for calling in today.
thank you for facilitating this awesome series of discussions. I mean, thank you for facilitating like so many awesome and amazing things. This being not really chief among them, but it's a pleasure.
Well, you are the chief among them. And I got to tell you, in the last few minutes as we've been waiting for you to join, we have been greeted most magnificently from Witchstarter community members calling in from all over the world, as far as Ecuador, Greece, Egypt, Ukraine. We have as many people joining us as there are, we can look at the places where people are literally calling in from today, and what we see is almost dots on a map that point towards some of the history of magic, right? And you're a historian of magic in this way. Please just, I'm so used to talking, we can just get into it and we can go forever. But before we get started, Moses, will you please introduce yourself and tell some people here about your background and what it is you do?
Sure. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet you all on this platform. My name is Brother Hoodoo Moses. I do a whole lot of things. Among them, and leading to this conversation, I'm a cultural anthropologist and sociologist, sort of cultural historian, looking at magic, indigenous folk magic practices, and indigenous religion, right? Pre-institutional religion. I have a particular interest in the period of antiquity, so the biblical period and the period immediately after, but my research over the past 25 years at this point has been pretty far-reaching. Man, the white hair in my beard doesn't make me feel old, but when I talk about how long I've been reading about this stuff and studying it, it makes me feel really old. So I am, Meredith asked me to join her here because I'm launching a Witchstarter campaign, and I guess that's how this whole thing works. And I guess we'll get into that. We don't have to shill right now.
Well, it would be nice for us to hear a little bit about your history with Kickstarter, but moreover, something that you and I have talked about in the past that, I mean, you put this idea in you were the person who brought it to my attention, after which point I felt, worlds expanding as I normally do after we end up talking for more than a couple minutes, is this idea that, as I remember introducing you to the idea of Kickstarter and saying, hey, you could really, I had already worked here, you could really do something with this. You said, oh, well, that's normal. Okay, and you're, well, since the earliest days, there's been public funding of religious and spiritual efforts. This is ancient. And I went, oh my God, you're right. Okay, so before you tell us a little bit about your history with Kickstarter, why don't you give people a little bit about the history of public funding of religion and spiritual efforts, a topic that we've both become passionately interested in since you've sort of illuminated it, but something you know quite a lot about.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting for us to consider in the current paradigm, right? Because we have institutional religions and they really give us, a check the box, put the money in the envelope, send it in model, and it's very top down, right? But historically, these things were self-propelled. There was no central authority to do that. And so people who had a desire for a certain spiritual community, a certain community of practice, a certain possibility, even a space, a container to hold it all, would pool their resources, and we see this, even moving into the contemporary era, and particularly in the realms of preserving folk magic and folk traditions in burial societies, which were the means primarily that culture survived in the United States. Everyone retained their burial practices. And of course, with burial comes all sorts of spirituality. And so that became the vehicle for the preservation. And these were, autonomous, if you will, horizontal, completely non-for-profit groups that just cared. And so when we start talking about Kickstarter and how y'all are kind of a facilitator for precisely that, for autonomous people who just care to make all this happen. Because we can also talk about the converse, which has also been a major part of things, right? We have a huge period of magic. And when we talk about like grimoire magic, I think what people think of as high magic, these are all pretty much held, all these grimoires and all these traditions were pretty much held by either nobility or landed gentry, people who could afford, a few months to go do these rituals and the exotic ingredients and equipment, or by, simple magicians, wandering itinerant mages who would get some sort of noble sponsor. And either way, the direction of the magic, the intent of the magic was always bound very closely to the intent and the will of some, financial underwriter. So coming now back into a period where we understand in the world of radio how it benefits from, like, hey, we have NPR, they can do cool content, they can do long form content, they can do stuff. When we underwrite it ourselves, they can do stuff that the commercial ventures can't do. Now we're coming back into magic and saying, like, oh, well, yeah, maybe it was because it was all like lords and nobility that we have these magic preeminently concerned with power and control, right? Maybe if we can give that same sort of funding structure to that self-propelled impetus that we talked about, that original impetus that existed in the folk magical and the folk religious, etc. Maybe if we can go there and provide that same sort of financial fuel to make its way in our present world, we get to this place where some other magics get expressed, some other virtues get nurtured through intention.
I simply want to take a moment and appreciate the fact that you drew a through line from underwritten Renaissance magic through the American development of the Odd Fellows and burial societies through to NPR and PBS. I just want to make sure everyone.
This is what we talk about, right?
We just went from Emperor Rudolph to Mr. Rogers in like 30 seconds flat. I'm so delighted that you joined us. This is exactly why I wanted to make sure that you were on the roster, as it were. Because this is a real thing, right? When you talk about the development of a religious or a burial, because what we talk about when we talk about a burial organization could be anything from the horsemen or the plowmen to the Freemasons, right?
Yeah, and when we go on and look even like where my research as an undergraduate was in African diasporic traditions, when we look in Haiti, we look in Cuba, we look even here in America, how these traditions were carried over was not primarily by a priesthood, it was primarily by these burial societies. Mm-hmm. And they retain this close connection with ancestor reverence, right? That came via these burial societies. But even the Jewish burial society, that's where a lot of Jewish tradition was transmitted and collected here, as communities, in any diaspora, kind of in that common ground in a time of mourning, will seek each other out to say, hey, can you mourn my dead with me? Mm-hmm. And that's such a powerful common denominator, and it seems that everyone can respect how everyone else does it for the most part, but you still want to do it the way that your ancestors that your dead would want it done, right? So it's this really incredible chain that connects the past, connects us to that past, and it goes, I love how the phrase prehistory just means before we have books from, because it conjures cavemen in the minds, but we're not talking caveman era, right? So that period of prehistory where we did not have the information recording and distribution technology to administer a state or to administer like a large religious body in that way, we come to, again, that same impetus, right? That like, hey, we all care. We're going to pool our resources, whether it's time or money or shovels, to dig a grave. Because that's really the other very functional thing, is like, it's a lot of work to dig a grave. You probably want a buddy or two. And so you kind of need a little society of people who are willing to do it. And that feeds into this, hey, it takes, many hands make for light work. Mm-hmm. And we see that ethos throughout the traditions that support and perpetuate folk magical systems. I feel like I'm way off from your original prompt.
Not even close, because this is something I'm, as an outreach director at Kickstarter, it's my job somehow benevolently, because I'm extremely lucky and have no idea how I landed here. It's my job to work with creators at all stages of the development of their creative process. And I often joke that I'm here to lend technical, creative, and interpersonal support. AKA, it's about more than money. If I joke with my creators a lot, if this were about getting money, I would be facilitating you getting a job delivering pizzas. It's about what the money's going to get you. It's about finishing your film. It's about refinishing the front of the historic property, about publishing the book, about making the board game or the tarot deck or the temple extension or so on and so forth, right? It really is very neatly, you're putting a bow on what I think about every day when I'm lucky enough to work with creators in this space, right? But this leads me to a very interesting point. You've run a successful campaign before with the help of many hands. People all over the world come in to support you. despite the fact that your campaign is very localized to the Colorado area. I would love for you to tell people a little bit about your history with Kickstarter, and then we can get into what your plans are up ahead, because we haven't really told anyone yet. You've been telling people great stuff on your Instagram, but we haven't really talked about what we have planned or anything, and we can do that today too. But tell us about your last campaign. Tell us about your history with our platform.
Yeah, I want to say we ran that about 18 months ago, maybe 24 months ago. Things have been a blur since pandemic era, but we were looking to really get the ritual space for my nonprofit off the ground and fully outfitted. I had actually already put up the space, but it wasn't winterproofed, and so it was only kind of like a half a year thing. We launched a Kickstarter campaign, and you were really helpful, Meredith, in kind of telling me that, well, this is how the system works, but we're not really stuck on it, and use it however you want. We're not going to stop you. And that's when I started kind of tweaking the Kickstarter framework in a bunch of different ways. So although obviously like a ritual space is a very localized project, you have to be able to come to the ritual space. We were able to make offerings through Kickstarter and saying like, well, you're supporting the ritual space, but for your support of the ritual space, you will get this handmade set of Archangel Michael prayer cards, or this handmade oil, or this series of lectures and things of that nature. So kind of realizing that whereas the end use of funds, the goal that we're trying to bring to the community can be localized, the rewards and the things associated with that can travel pretty freely. And that has been hugely influential in how I'm crafting this next campaign, right? Which I think we're set to announce next week. I think we're getting on track for it. I feel comfortable officially pre-announcing today.
Thanks. And I know you've told through your Instagram, and which, on Instagram, you're constantly providing such information-rich posting to everyone. You're yourself, you're a teacher, you're an author, you're a scholar, you're also like a prominent member of our community who's in constant communication with people, and so you've hipped people to what the plan is and some of the aspects that are going to be involved. But in summation here, for maybe the Kickstarter audience, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your upcoming campaign aims to do? I mean, I'm being very coy here. Can you tell people a little bit about how you almost blew yourself up and why we're running another Kickstarter campaign?
I was going to leave that part out of it, actually. I never know whether that's the key point or not. Yeah, so among my many pursuits, I as Meredith said, I'm a researcher, I'm a scholar, I'm all these things. I'm very deeply into the theory, but I'm really not into theory without practice, Virgo. So I practice all this stuff, and I have, a whole alchemy lab set up, and I have the ritual space where we practice the ritual part of it, and there are all these areas of practice. I was preparing a distillation of galangal root, which is used for court case magic, and my copper still exploded. Both exploded in my home and kind of exploded in my face. As you can see, I'm not really particularly worse for wear. Maybe some new gray hairs, but otherwise, the burns to my eyes and whatever were kind of miraculously restored in less than 24 hours. But the whole space was pretty much blowed up, and this led to a number of reflections. Firstly, that. And it's so funny how, like, when you go through like a sudden trauma, I'm in the ER, all these people around me, my eyes are closed because they're burned, so I can't really make what's what. And the things that go through your head in these situations, because at that point, like, I knew I was not going to die right then. So then it's like, okay, what now? What next? And what became really apparent was, also this was in the wrangling with the landlord in the immediate aftermath, where he was like, well, what makes you think you're supposed to be doing this in the rental unit? And I was like, well, it's a home distillation unit. Where else are you going to go distill a bottle of galangal root? There's no place. And that started the wheels turning, right? Because he was right. It probably shouldn't have been happening in my kitchen. But where would you do it? Where would any of you guys do it, right? There's no place. And that's what got the wheels turning for this next campaign, because the ritual space is amazing. It's an incredible community resource, but it's really only for ritual. There's not that much that can happen in there. And it's only for small groups or individuals at a time. So the idea now is, okay, that's great for the ritual part of the practice. That's also great for the didactics, right? It's a great space to teach in and pass along tradition and things like that. But what about when it comes to the making candles, the making of oils, the running of a still, and all these other things? where do we have a community space for that? And the answer is we don't. And so that's what led to my inspiration here. And I kind of racking my mind for models of this kind of thing that I might be able to appropriate and not have to come up with from scratch. I was reminded of the like many, many, many happy visits I've had to a local hackerspace where it's just a bunch of resources in terms of tools and books and people who know how to use them, and this great ethos of like, hey, let's create together, let's try some stuff together in a low and no stakes environment. Let's do some stuff we wouldn't try at home because it's safe here and the resources are here and there's guidance here and there's a community here, and let's see if we can do something amazing, right? And in my very brief time at a hackerspace, those guys helped me build I have no background in electronics whatsoever. I came out of there not only like being pretty handy with a solder iron and being able to read a circuit diagram, but with some very cool devices that they helped me like design and build. And that idea of like, I went in there with an intention and a desire, you know, will and intention being kind of two parts of that magical triangle. So this comes back around to how magical a space like that can be. And of course, like, there's that basic aspect of facilitating community. For the most part, I think that community, especially here in Colorado, is very based around like shops, apothecaries, wherever people get the materia. And that's awesome. On the other hand, like, wouldn't it be cool if we gathered not just to get the materia, but to do the making, you know, to synthesize the materia. And then when we come to the next fact, I inevitably ponder. This was based on someone discussing with, I have two little kids, as you well know, Meredith, but as you all guys probably don't yet. I have two little kids, so I do a lot of dad stuff. And in the dad stuff, I was talking to another parent, and we were discussing how eating is actually a social activity. It serves a social function. We don't teach our kids just that it nourishes your body, but it's also a time to nourish our community. It builds connection, etc. And in reflecting on that, I was reflecting on how, oh yeah, food prep is also, you know, traditionally in every society one of the main places where social bonds are made. And then I was reflecting even further on like, really, it's not just food prep. It's when they build houses, when they do anything. People work in community, and in working in community, pass along tradition, weave lore, and make strong connections. And so that was the final piece here where it was like, okay, so if I can create a place where, first of all, it's non-hierarchical, right? It's completely horizontal. It's not that I am the teacher or administrator or whatever. We're all sort of in there teaching and learning from each other in that very magical ethos and creating with shared resources. My hope is to facilitate a whole new, and hopefully one that happens in my lifetime, but outlives me for sure, a whole new dynamic, a whole new dimension in progressive magic. I think about how having a single book translated and releasing that to a community can change things, right? The Greek magical papyri are translated, and now we have PGM magic as a like subgenre of magic that a community gathers around, right? And that's because they have a common source to work from. And so among the other things we have this massive library of like hundreds of occult and esoteric books, some of them like the stuff you'll find in your bookstore, and some you definitely won't unless you have a time machine and a way of finding really weird bookstores, right? And having those texts and having that place of community, I'm very much into this idea of, you know, the very Japanese way of cultivating, where you don't grow anything with any specific intention. You prepare an environment for things to grow, and what takes root in that environment is what should grow there, right?
I was reminded, what is that? Not neglect farming, but I was reminded about
do
that.
nothing farming. Yep,
do nothing
that's exactly
farming.
Yep, do nothing farming. Yep. That's and that Masao no Fukuoka One Straw Revolution is in our library. But yeah, that's that idea of like, if you put the right food for something, the things that need that food will come there. And I know that this is a resource that when I was a kid trying to like kind of crossing that boundary of like, hey, is magic real? That first time, like, I'm pretty sure this stuff's real. Let me find out more to assess it more thoroughly, as we Virgos like to do. There was no place to go. There was metaphysical bookstores. There was maybe, I don't know, yeah, there weren't like witch shops like we have now, you know. But even now, when you go into a witch shop, like just by the nature of like, hey, they're trying to run a business, you really can't stand at that counter all day and just be like, hey, I just want to chat. Let's talk about herbs for a few hours. There's no place for that, right? Theoretically, we have that online, but the very basic proposition of like the social media model is a little frustrating, right? Like we should be able to do this without having to put on makeup, but here we are, right? So that leads us to like, hey, it would be really cool to have a place where someone could just walk in and I could say, hey, how you doing today? Would you like a cup of tea? What brings you in today? And whatever comes from there. I don't know. I heard you have a whole library of weird books about Freemasonry. Can you tell me about the Freemasons? Sure. I heard you have a whole laboratory where you do alchemy. What is alchemy? Well, here's some books. And it's also about providing a hub to almost, well, in the exact thing that Kickstarter does, right? Kickstarter takes funding and it spreads it out rather than saying like, oh, here's a patron who is my patron and this person gives me my livelihood, so I'm beholden to them. It says, well, here's a community, and it spreads that impact out and spreads that out. So the same with, there's some really great teachers. When I think of alchemy, I think of Robert Allen Bartlett, right? The preeminent living alchemist. But a 1 day lesson or 2 days with Robert are $10,000 outside of my reach. But probably within the reach of a community of 40 or 50 people pooling their money to bring Robert out to the same place to work on the equipment together. And that's kind of the idea is let's create a domain where these things are possible, where like right off the bat, all traditions are welcome and accepted. There's no, there's this thing of walking into the metaphysical bookstore that I still have where I'm like gauging the guy behind the counter and being like, is he like a tarot guy or is he more
I'm
like
guilty. I was in Salem a few weeks ago and I think I went to 16 occult small businesses in a span of about 72 hours. And every bookstore I went beeline right to the books. I'm like, okay, what's missing?
Right.
Whatever's missing orients you in the direction of the ownership, and you see differences. You start to, the more immersed you become, you pick up on the little differences with every different one. You go, oh, you carry the Palgrave series, oh, but you carry the Penn State, for like the really occult academia nerds. It definitely gives you a vibe. Which gods are on the altar in the front of the store, which ones are in the altar in the back of the store that you don't really see. It's a whole series of vibes, right?
And there's so much to that where like, what if this could all just fit comfortably in one space, right? Because I just really love the choose your own adventureness of it, where any given day you can show up and say, I never made candles before, but I'm going through this problem and I was reading online that I might want a candle. I don't want to buy a candle, or I don't even know what candle to buy. Let me come on down there. Let me learn about candle magic in general. Let me learn a little bit about herbs, and then I'll make an informed decision. And I can look at the herbs, and I can smell the herbs, and I can handle the herbs. And I think that kind of the apothecary that encourages you to smell every jar versus the one that's like, oh, yeah, I can give you a little whiff. That's the idea here.
One other commonality that I know you and I have is that we both have a background we come from music. Right? And I feel like what you're describing energetically has the same concept as when you walk into a studio, someone is recording a track, and then when you show up, there's some people in the room and there's some people you don't, and everyone's kind of getting down to this. It kind of has that cultural remixing vibe. It's very easy to imagine a plurality of backgrounds in one space, kind of all going on the same track, right? It kind of has that definitely a remixed energy. At least from what we're getting used to in today's day and age in terms of magical culture, which you very neatly outlined. I also think a key thing about the plan for the new space, which thank you for your very generous explanation. I'm sorry I gave you such a lead into that story, is that it does away with, if this isn't explicitly stated, it's apparent in the way you describe it, key aspects of what we now consider to be Western magic, and especially Western ceremonial magic, i.e. the hierarchy.
Yeah.
The position of the individual, but also the absolute knowledge of the individual, that surface dispersion, whether it's the magician with his one patron who he owes everything to, kind of being like walking on a bed of nails, right? Like one person can't balance on one point. It takes lots of points to make something even feasible and physically possible for the human to do. But also that idea of the magician as a solitary operator, this stereotype that admittedly, silver lining did serve us well during the pandemic when we were all kind of solo alchemists walled up in our house, right? Operating alone. This is something that we do understand in the West. But it's a feature as much as it is a bug, to use that hacker language, right? It's like something that's implicitly non-Western about what you're describing, what you're intimating with the new space.
Yeah, there's something that happens. Well, there's something that happened during the pandemic where practitioners were shut down with their practices, right? Maybe they're small, very small communities of practice, but in the beginning, most people were just by themselves, right? And I think it is supportive and it is congruent with what happens in the social media space, having discussions on anything, which is this siloing, right? And we've seen it in politics, we've seen it in society, we've seen it over every issue. But when you are being guided by a hashtag rather than an ethos, meaning you're being guided by a label for an idea rather than the content of the idea, you will inevitably start getting recursion, right? You get stuck in there. And this is obviously not how things work. You know, the oldest written sources we have use these very big, obscure terms for concepts. The law, the Tao, these things that, and when we speak of the Tao that can be named is not the Tao, right? That is fundamentally it. That if you can hashtag it, that's definitely not the Tao. That's not what we're talking about here, right? Mana in Hawaiian tradition, like these big ideas that can't neatly be put into 155 characters or a 90-second reel. Even if they extend reels from 30 seconds to 90 seconds, it's still not enough to teach you sacred geometry, with all due respect to everyone trying to do it, right? There's so much that comes from not taking a topical approach, from taking the meandering path. And I think that is certainly the mystic's path, very often the magician's path, and I hear some witches and conjurers refer to it as the crooked path, right? Because it's not this direct. There is some questioning. There is room for discovery in that, and that's very, very, very much what I'm creating here.
Naturally, none of the things that you just cited, like you said, it's also the Tao. You know, it's not unique to people on the mystical or numinous or New Age or occult side of things. I'm reminded often, I think I'm going to manage to mention him once in every conversation I have lately. It seems that it reminds me of the Carmelite monk, Brother Lawrence, who was a avowed pagan soldier until he took too many whacks to the coconut and then realized doing the dishes allowed him to talk to God more effectively. You know, you come to it through your own path. And this is obviously what the space is going to facilitate for people in the.
Well, and what you touched on there is kind of one of has been my key points with the nonprofit, like remarrying magic and mysticism and spirituality and religion, which these things have been hashtagged apart, but in their roots, you know, whether you want to take a Christian or Jewish or Islamic or any other faith, you have this really magical figure who performs some mysteries or another, some miraculous magic that then leads to religion, right? Like these are not unconnected concepts. And of course, when we go back to the study of the roots of magic and go back to Zoroastrianism, the Chaldean system, we find that, oh, indeed, as far back as we have any record, these were definitely the exact same thing. And this brings in the other piece, it bled into, I want to say, all of the crafts that we know, right? Like smithing didn't start as like, hey, I want to make an engine block. Metallurgy started with magic, right? With religion, with this, likewise with weaving, likewise with all these technical arts, and that's also where the makerspace piece comes into, because like I don't know those things and I'd like to learn many of them, right? And I know some things that I'm happy to teach. And then there are things where it's like, maybe I'm not going to learn to smith some knife, but maybe I want to have a, you know, magically smith knife anointed with an oil that I made in a proper alchemical setting and all these things. Like there's no one-stop shop for that in the world as far as I know. So my 8-year-old has just gotten very into Harry Potter. She just reached the age where we said, okay, you can read these books, and she's devoured the first 3 books. Immediately, Dad's bookshelf has become more exciting. In the immediate aftermath of that, all of the sudden, you know. But that said, it's a little bit Diagon Alley. It's a little bit Hogwarts, where it's a place to hold the magic, and the idea that you can have an ongoing project there. This is one of the beautiful things about hackerspaces, where, as I told you, it was a couple minutes late today because I was up finishing a project till 5:30 this morning, because first you got to make the oil, then you got to strain the oil, then you got to bottle oil, then you got to label the oil, and on and on and on. There's definitely no place where you can just leave it and come back, kind of ceramic studio style, or leave your, you know, whatever ritual making you're doing, any ritual object we make, whether it's a wand or whatever. It's a very lengthy multi-step process, and often we're saying, all right, I'm only working on Sunday in the hour of the sun, so I have like 1 hour each week that I'm going to work on this. All of a sudden it's saying like, all right, I'll see you next Sunday. You know, have a good weekend. Mm-hmm. And this container is held all week long, right? There is something about working magically in a living space. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, it sort of magics up the whole living space. On the other hand, it sort of mundanes down all the magic, right? And, you know, to some extent, that is traditional, right? Certainly traditional societies wove some amount of spirituality into daily life. But on the other hand, the sacred is always inherently separate, right? It's always a mask we don't wear the rest of the year. The medicine man lives on the outskirts of the village. There is, you know, and we talk about this so much in the etymology of the word witch and wizard, being the outsider, the twisted one. Like, there is this necessity, and I was discussing this with McCalla from Saturn Box yesterday, about how magic must always be dear. Right? If magic is not dear, it is not powerful. So how can we make magic dear and free? In the past, we made magic dear by making it expensive, which, you know, worked because the people who were doing that were the people who kind of ruled capital and property at the time. But how can we keep magic dear, make magic dear again? Will maybe be my hat. But how can we make magic dear without making it economically burdensome? Well, it comes to integrity of practice, right? Because if you have shown up on the hour of sun every Sunday for 7 Sundays, you've put a lot into that, even if you haven't paid a penny, right? Not just time, but intention that you hold through the week. And all of a sudden that magic is dear again. When you've taken, you know, we talk about sacrifice and how sacrifice is a battery of faith, right? Or charges the battery of faith. When we make a sacrifice of any sort, whether it's an animal or a charity, you know, planetary charity donation, we're saying, hey, based on my belief is so strong that I'm going to do something against my best interest to underwrite that belief, right? So that's where we get into the installation of value in the magic, right? All value is based on risk. So what risk can we ask people to take in that context? And part of that is wandering to that weird place you've heard about and knocking on that door instead of just lurking on the threshold. And when the weird dude opens the door and offers you a cup of tea, sitting down and saying like, hey, I heard that magic is real.
The sacrifice of your pride, the sacrifice of your cringe, the sacrifice of your self-image when you were, you know, people. I'll never forget once being pulled into the back room of an occult shop by the very powerful owner who goes, I gotta talk to you about something. What's going on? I don't actually know any Latin. And it was like I was being given a confessional in that. I will never forget it because it was so striking to me as a living, energetic sacrifice of a person's pride or a person's, you know, public image. That's so much more powerful than people know. And this is why it's not a large buy-in. It's only your whole self. You know, that's all you have to do is give up all of your illusions and you'll be great. You know,
I feel like we need sacrifice your cringe merch. I feel
sacrifice
like that
your cringe, make magic dear again, and other merch that will
maybe part of this campaign. Maybe part of this campaign.
Angels protect me, demons respect me. Everyone else just thinks I'm a strange wizard on the internet. Shirts for 2023, right? Yeah,
this is again we're fine tuning the details on the offerings for this campaign. Can I talk a little about the offerings? Is this
Please do. Please do. And before that, quickly, I want to remind people who are tuning in that if they have questions about Kickstarter
Oh yeah.
is about upcoming plans for Holy Mountain Spiritualist Temple or any other ones of the wonderful projects that Brother Moses is engaged in. You're more than welcome to leave that in the chat. But please, in the time we have left, tell us more about the rewards for the upcoming campaign, your fabulous partners who you'll be working with, and then maybe we could even, if we really want, we could tell people about our party, which we have.
Yeah, this is I haven't specifically not announced that or even really teased it out, so we're going to do that.
All right.
So the rewards for the campaign, as per usual, I'm absolutely going against Kickstarter protocol, which the protocol is, hey, we want to make this one awesome thing. We need to make this many in order for it to be feasible. I've kind of done away with that entirely and said, I want to make this one awesome place. We're on the same page there, which is why we're doing this. But rather than produce a whole bunch of mass-produced stuff that everyone has, we're going to create some really, really unique magical items and experiences. And, of course, there will be the T-shirts, and there will be the stickers and all the usual, you know, I supported an alchemist, bumper sticker, and all that stuff. But I'm working with the people who we have worked really closely with to make some of the ritual items for the temple. Ritual exorcism knife, for example, a hand-carved lead scythe for the Saturn altar that was made with a tree that a goat was sacrificed to Saturn on. There is a lot of very unique magical items that we have spent the last 2 years accumulating and making available to people in the temple space. But we realize that not everyone can come here. So we're going to make a few more and make those available as part of the campaign. The other thing we're definitely going to be doing is experiences. Our good friend Ed's Manifesto has graciously agreed to donate some time for a group camping trip with me and Ed and Meredith if she's available. But she's usually like saving the world and doing amazing stuff. But yeah, come camp with us for a week. Get weird in the desert. Share all sorts of wisdom and spooky stories and magical rites and rituals and things of that nature. We're also planning a bunch of pop-up sessions around the country. So for folks who are like, well, I can't really make it to Colorado, we're looking at the major metro areas. Right now, we certainly have Atlanta, Miami, New York. I feel like we have somewhere in the DC, and then West Coast, and then a bunch of stuff in the Midwest where I'll be popping up for a few days, and we'll meet community, we'll gather, we'll have lectures, we'll have readings. It'll be 2 or 3 days of deep, deep, deep magical immersion that hopefully will change your life, like for all of hereafter. And then various other things for folks who either are local to Colorado or are down to come to Colorado. We're going to have a number of workshops and classes, as I usually give, in the lab space. You always wanted to learn what alchemy was all about? Come on down. In addition, I'll be offering some of the formulas that I make, custom formulas for folks. It's kind of like a personal fragrance and magical formula that you can wear year-round. And for folks who are interested in coming locally, you can come and join me for the whole process, smell all the herbs, pick them out, exactly what we're going to be doing in this space. And on top of that, we have a few more interesting in-person ritual experiences available, and many other cool things. Our good friend James, A Quiet Practice, is donating 2 incredible magical weaving classes, also a woven altar cloth. Mary Henlin is donating an incredible handmade Santa Muerte statue. We have a whole host of people. I think Ravi Zupa is donating some vintage Ravi Zupa prints that have been out of print for a long time. There's a lot I got to wrangle from my email right now, but it's really this amazing community of people who have been part of the journey so far, helping to take the journey to the next level. And I'm really excited to take these things that are part of this local community here and make them accessible where they can go where they belong.
And, you know, not to put too neat of a bow on it, but that is kind of, in so many ways, not that, you know, one can even put a bow on this, but it's this idea of what we want magic to do when it's at its best and at its most effective. We want to forge connections. We want to collect the sort of emotional and spiritual and community resources, and we want to forge connections with other points out in the world in order to advance the collective's highest good. And I am so proud of you and so excited for everything that this campaign is going to bring. It's going to be absolutely fabulous, and it's going to be a lot of fun too. That's another thing, is that one reason that I always love to work with you so much in every capacity is because always at the loftiest, most theurgical point, I guess some would say, you always find a way to make things so accessible and so fun for everyone involved. Your classes are fun, your work, your materia is fun, your books are fun, and you bring so much joy to the world. So on behalf of the entire Witchstarter community worldwide, thank you so much for being you in the world, but also for being here with us today and taking some time out from an incredibly, incredibly busy life with everything you do to talk to us about history and practice as it exists in your world. And I will, since we can't lock in a particular date live and direct right now, I will tell people to follow you here on Instagram to find out precisely when your campaign is launching and what you have going on next, correct?
Definitely. And now I guess is the opportune moment to tell everyone what we'll be doing in a couple Saturdays, yeah?
So,
yes?
All right.
Yes.
All right, we can blow up our own spot. Finally, and some people who are watching may be aware of this, but upcoming 2 weekends from now on October 29th, if you watching are local to the Denver or general Colorado area with the ability to travel, Witchstarter will be celebrating our first ever full month with an event in Denver on Saturday, October 29th, held at the Half Moon Flower Farm, where we are going to, we being myself and Moses, and a group of wonderful community members and creators from the greater Denver metropolitan area, will be getting together for an afternoon of food, friendship, and flowers above all, which is the provenance of the Half Moon Flower Farm. We will be having an afternoon event of floral arranging workshops, alchemy as led by Moses, and hopefully just a ton of snacks and beautiful weather and the opportunity to meet with other magicians and creatives in the area on one of the most beautiful farms you've ever seen in your entire life. So
I don't undersell it because it's not just a beautiful farm. We didn't pick just any flower farm for our Witchstarter Halloween event. Half Moon Farm is especially interesting because they are fertilized entirely with aquamated human remains. I have gone down there with my dowsing rods, and it is completely off the charts. I have never done, like I douse graveyards pretty often. I've never seen anything like this. The rods are just like, yup, there's spirits here the whole time, everywhere. You can feel it there. It is a really powerful place. And so as we get into the later evening, it's we'll be using some of the Florida water that we make from the Florida Water of the Dead and doing some ritual stuff, I think, for folks who hang around.
We will be distilling rose hydrosol with roses fertilized with recently departed volunteer ex-humans, is how I've been phrasing it to a lot of people. If you are a recent volunteer ex-human, you may be fertilizing roses on the Half Moon Flower Farm at present. And we will be there on the afternoon of October 29th with some of our most wonderful friends, having an absolutely fabulous day of conversation, both interpersonal conversation and spirit conversation, as Moses so generously outlined. I call it necromantic networking with some of Denver's finest. So if you are watching and you are in the greater Denver area, please feel free to send us a DM if you'd like an invitation. We would be absolutely delighted to have you. And truly, I cannot stress how excited I am to be out there, not only to just get out of my little New York City hovel, but to be in this energetic environment with you and so many of our wonderful peers out there, recent creators, and just truly mesmerizingly inspiring people. So spots blown up, folks. Witchstarter is going to Denver for Halloween weekend, and we're going to have a spirited time, I would say.
A spirited time indeed.
I'm so glad we can end on a dad joke. Moses, thank you so much
for joining us
today. For the people following, give Moses a follow here on Instagram. Stay abreast of what he's doing, not only with his Kickstarter campaign, but with educational endeavors at the Holy Mountain Spiritualist Temple and all of the amazing materia, magic, and publications that he'll be providing on his online store. He does regular drops of some of the most incredible materia that you have ever worked with. I'm not just a student and a Kickstarter co-creator, I am also a client. And let me tell you, the man makes some wonderfully powerful stuff. To find out what's going on in the world of Witchstarter through the rest of October 2022, you can visit www.kickstarter.com/Witchstarter for all of the latest magical and cultural products launched on our fine platform. I am at Graves Meredith here on Instagram. I want to thank everyone for joining us today from everywhere in the world that you called in, and I hope you have an absolutely blessed rest of your week. We will see you soon.